A cowboy smiles in an 1873 photo, but zooming in on his holster reveals a dark truth. In the fall of 2023, Dr. Marcus Rodriguez received an intriguing package at his office in the Western History Department at the University of Colorado. The sender, a descendant of early settlers in Dodge City, Kansas, had inherited a collection of frontier-era photographs and wanted them authenticated before donating them to the National Cowboy Museum in Oklahoma City. Among the dozens of typical frontier photographs, cattle drives, town scenes, and formal portraits of pioneers, one image immediately commanded Dr. Rodriguez's attention: the professional studio photograph bearing the embossed mark J.P. Manning Photography, Dodge City, Kansas, and dated September 14, 1873, showed a single cowboy in full frontier attire, standing confidently before an elaborate painted backdrop depicting the Kansas prairie. The subject appeared to be a man in his late 20s, wearing the standard costume of a working cowboy: leather chaps over wool pants, a cotton shirt with a bandana tied loosely around his neck, and a wide-brimmed hat positioned at a slight angle. His boots showed the wear patterns of someone who spent long hours in the saddle, and his hands bore the weathered appearance of outdoor labor. What made this photograph unusual was the cowboy's expression. Unlike the stoic, serious demeanor typical of frontier portraits, where subjects rarely smiled due to long exposure times and cultural conventions, this man displayed a broad, confident grin that seemed to radiate satisfaction and perhaps even smugness. His posture was relaxed yet proud, suggesting someone who was particularly pleased with himself at the moment the photograph was taken. The studio setting was elaborate for a frontier town in 1873. Manning's photography had clearly invested in quality equipment and professional backdrops, indicating this was a premium establishment serving clients who could afford expensive commemorative portraits. The lighting was expertly managed, creating dramatic shadows that emphasized the cowboy's rugged features while ensuring every detail of his clothing and equipment was clearly visible. However, it was precisely this clarity that would eventually reveal the photograph's dark secret. Dr. Rodriguez noticed that the cowboy's gun belt and holster were particularly well defined in the image, showing craftsmanship and detail that suggested expensive, custom-made equipment rather than standard frontier gear. As Dr. Rodriguez examined the photograph more carefully, he began to sense that this seemingly straightforward portrait of a proud cowboy might contain layers of meaning that had remained hidden for 150 years. Dr. Rodriguez's initial examination of the photograph under magnification revealed technical excellence that was remarkable for frontier photography in 1873. J.P. Manning had clearly mastered the advanced photographic techniques of the era, achieving a level of detail and clarity that rivaled the work of famous photographers in established eastern cities. However, as Dr. Rodriguez studied the image more closely, he began to notice anomalies that didn't align with his extensive knowledge of frontier-era firearms and equipment. The cowboy's holster, while beautifully crafted, contained details that seemed inconsistent with standard Western gear of the 1870s. Most puzzling was a series of small markings visible on the holster's leather surface. Under magnification, these appeared to be intentional decorative elements, small symbols or notches that had been carefully carved into the leather. While decorative holsters were not uncommon among wealthy or successful cowboys, these particular markings followed a pattern that Dr. Rodriguez didn't recognize from his studies of frontier craftsmanship. More disturbing was what appeared to be staining on the holster's interior, visible where the leather had been pulled back slightly to reveal the gun's grip. The discoloration was subtle but consistent with patterns Dr. Rodriguez had seen in forensic studies of historical evidence. The stains appeared too dark and persistent to be simple wear marks or leather dye. Dr. Rodriguez consulted with Dr. Sarah Chen, a specialist in frontier-era material culture at the Smithsonian Institution. Dr. Chen's analysis of the photograph's technical details confirmed that the holster was indeed unusual for its time period. The craftsmanship is exceptional, Dr. Chen noted, but the decorative elements follow a pattern I've never encountered in documented frontier gear. These markings appear to be deliberate and systematic, suggesting they served a specific purpose beyond mere decoration. Most significantly, Dr. Chen identified what appeared to be a partial serial number or maker's mark visible on the gun's grip. Early examination suggested this might be a custom-made firearm, possibly commissioned for a specific purpose rather than purchased as standard equipment. The cowboy's confident smile took on a more sinister quality as Dr. Rodriguez began to suspect that the photograph documented something far more significant than a proud frontier worker commemorating his success. The markings on the holster appeared to tell a story, and that story might reveal a dark chapter in frontier justice that had been deliberately concealed. Dr. Rodriguez's breakthrough came when he subjected the photograph to advanced digital enhancement techniques available at the University of Colorado's Digital Humanities Laboratory. The sophisticated imaging software revealed details that had been invisible to traditional magnification, transforming his understanding of what the cowboy's holster actually contained. The enhanced image showed that the markings on the holster were not random decorative elements, but rather a systematic series of small notches, each one carefully carved into the leather in a consistent pattern. Most significantly, the digital enhancement revealed that these notches were not mere decoration. They appeared to be tallies, methodically recorded and maintained with obvious care. Further enhancement revealed that each notch was accompanied by tiny initials, barely visible even under digital magnification, but clearly intentional. The letters appeared to have been carved with a fine blade, suggesting meticulous attention to detail and permanent recording of information that the holster's owner considered important enough to preserve. Dr. Rodriguez consulted with forensic historians who specialized in analyzing evidence from violent crimes in the American frontier. Dr. Patricia Williams from the FBI's Historical Crime Analysis Unit provided expertise in interpreting the kind of systematic record-keeping that the holster markings appeared to represent. These markings are consistent with what we see in cases where individuals kept personal tallies of significant events. Dr. Williams explained. The systematic nature of the carving, the consistent spacing, and the addition of initials suggests this was a deliberate record-keeping system. In frontier contexts, this type of marking most commonly documented gunfights, successful hunts, or other events the owner considered noteworthy enough to commemorate permanently. The digital enhancement also revealed additional details about the firearm itself. The gun appeared to be a custom Colt 45 with specialized modifications including a filed trigger mechanism and altered grip that suggested it had been specifically adapted for quick-draw situations. These modifications were expensive and typically commissioned only by individuals whose livelihood depended on firearms proficiency. Most disturbing was the revelation that the holster contained what appeared to be multiple layers of staining, suggesting it had been exposed to biological material on numerous occasions. The pattern of discoloration was consistent with repeated exposure to blood, which had soaked into the leather and created permanent staining that 150 years had been unable to erase. The cowboy's confident smile in the photograph took on an entirely different meaning, as evidence mounted that his holster documented a systematic record of violence that he was apparently proud enough to commemorate in a professional portrait. Armed with evidence that the holster markings represented a systematic tally of violent encounters, Dr. Rodriguez began investigating the identity of the mysterious cowboy. The photograph's provenance traced back to a family collection from Dodge City, Kansas, suggesting the subject had been a resident of one of the frontier's most notorious towns during its most violent period. Dodge City in 1873 was at the height of its reputation as a lawless cattle town. The completion of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway had made it a major shipping point for Texas cattle drives, bringing together cowboys, gamblers, saloon keepers, and various criminal elements in a volatile mixture that frequently erupted into violence. Dr. Rodriguez's research into Dodge City's historical records revealed that J.P. Manning's photography studio had indeed operated during this period, serving as the town's premier establishment for commemorative portraits. Manning's business records, preserved in the Kansas State Historical Society archives, showed that he had photographed many of Dodge City's most notable residents, including lawmen, business owners, and successful gamblers. Most significantly, Manning's appointment book for September 14, 1873, contained an entry that matched the date on the cowboy photograph: T. Brennan, special session, premium rate, commemorative portrait. The notation about a special session and premium rate suggested this was an unusual commission, possibly celebrating a particular achievement or milestone. Research into Dodge City's residents during 1873 revealed that Tom Brennan had been a well-known figure in the town's gambling and entertainment district. However, official records about Brennan were surprisingly sparse, with most references to him appearing in unofficial sources such as personal letters, diary entries, and newspaper accounts that focused on Dodge City's more colorful characters. What records did exist painted a troubling picture. Contemporary accounts described Brennan as a professional gambler who was quick with his gun and quicker to take offense. Several diary entries from other Dodge City residents mentioned Brennan in connection with violent incidents, though official law enforcement records rarely documented his involvement. Most revealing was a letter written by a traveling businessman who had spent several weeks in Dodge City during the summer of 1873. The letter, preserved in a private family collection, described Brennan as a man who keeps score of his victories in ways that would disturb civilized society, and noted that he was proud of accomplishments that other men would consider shameful. The businessman's letter also mentioned that Brennan had been planning a celebration of his recent successes in September 1873, which coincided perfectly with the date of his commemorative portrait session at Manning's studio. Dr. Rodriguez's investigation into Tom Brennan's activities during the summer of 1873 revealed a pattern of violence that had been systematically underreported by Dodge City's official law enforcement. While the town's sheriff's reports contained only brief mentions of disturbances and gunplay, unofficial sources painted a picture of escalating violence that had made Brennan one of the most feared men in Kansas. Contemporary diary entries from Dr. Samuel McCarty, who served as Dodge City's physician during this period, provided graphic insight into the violence that official records had minimized. Dr. McCarty's medical journal documented treating numerous gunshot victims during the summer of 1873, many of whom had been wounded in confrontations with a professional gambler known for his quick temper and quicker draw. While Dr. McCarty didn't name Brennan directly in his medical records, his personal diary was more explicit. "Tom Brennan has become a plague upon this town," McCarty wrote in July 1873. "He provokes confrontations with anyone he perceives as challenging his reputation, and his skill with firearms has made him effectively immune to retaliation. Men who cross him in gambling or business tend to find themselves facing his gun, and few survive the encounter." Church records from Dodge City's Methodist congregation provided additional evidence of Brennan's violent activities. Reverend James Mitchell's burial records showed an unusual spike in deaths from gunshot wounds and violent incidents during the summer of 1873, with most occurring in or around the gambling establishments where Brennan was known to conduct his business. Most significantly, Dr. Rodriguez discovered a private letter written by Dodge City's mayor, James "Dog" Kelly, to Kansas territorial authorities requesting assistance with what he described as a crisis of public safety. The letter, dated August 30th, 1873, reported that a single individual has effectively terrorized our business district through systematic violence against anyone who challenges his authority. Mayor Kelly's letter continued, "This man operates with complete impunity, knowing that our local law enforcement is either unable or unwilling to confront someone of his demonstrated lethality. He appears to view each killing as an achievement to be celebrated, and his growing reputation only encourages more reckless behavior." The mayor's description of someone who celebrated his killings aligned perfectly with the evidence from Brennan's holster markings and his decision to commemorate his successes with a professional portrait. The timing of Kelly's letter, just 2 weeks before Brennan's photography session, suggested that the portrait had been taken at the peak of his violent career. Dr. Rodriguez was beginning to understand that the cowboy's confident smile in the photograph represented not pride in honest frontier work, but satisfaction with a summer of systematically murdering anyone who crossed him. Dr. Rodriguez's investigation took an unexpected turn when he discovered that Tom Brennan's reign of terror in Dodge City had attracted the attention of territorial authorities and private interests who had placed a substantial bounty on his capture, dead or alive. This revelation came through correspondence found in the Kansas Territorial Archives, where officials had been coordinating efforts to address the lawlessness that was threatening commerce in cattle towns. A telegram dated September 1st, 1873, from the Kansas Territorial Governor to federal marshals, reported that the situation in Dodge City requires immediate intervention and authorized all necessary measures to restore order. More specifically, the telegram mentioned that a notorious gunman has killed an estimated dozen men in gambling disputes and shows no signs of restraining his violent behavior. Dr. Rodriguez discovered that the territorial government had secretly commissioned a professional bounty hunter to eliminate Brennan when local law enforcement proved inadequate to the task. The bounty hunter, identified in confidential territorial records as James Iron Jim Morrison, was a former Union Army sniper who had developed a reputation for successfully completing assignments that regular lawmen couldn't handle. Morrison's service record, preserved in military archives, showed he had served as a sharpshooter during the Civil War and had transitioned to frontier law enforcement after the war's conclusion. His methods were unconventional but effective. Rather than attempting direct confrontation with dangerous criminals, Morrison specialized in careful planning and precision shooting that eliminated threats from a distance. Most significantly, Dr. Rodriguez found evidence that Morrison had arrived in Dodge City on September 10, 1873, just 4 days before Brennan's commemorative portrait session. A hotel register from the Dodge house showed that Morrison had checked in under an assumed name and had requested a room with a view of the main gambling district where Brennan conducted his business. Morrison's personal journal, discovered among family papers donated to the National Archives, provided insight into his planning process. Target has established predictable patterns: gambling houses in evening, photography studio September 14th for commemorative portrait. Subject appears to view his violent activities as achievements worthy of celebration. This arrogance will provide opportunity for resolution. The journal entry revealed that Morrison had learned about Brennan's scheduled portrait session and had planned to use the appointment as an opportunity to eliminate his target. The bounty hunter's careful reconnaissance had identified that Brennan would be stationary and distracted during the photography session, creating ideal conditions for a long-distance shot. Morrison's journal also revealed his disgust with Brennan's behavior. Subject keeps tally of his murders carved into his holster leather and speaks openly of his collection of victims. His complete lack of remorse and evident pride in killing innocent men makes this assignment a service to civilized society. The evidence suggested that Brennan's confident smile in the photograph had been captured just moments before Morrison's intervention would permanently end his violent career. Morrison's journal provided detailed documentation of how he had prepared for the elimination of Tom Brennan, revealing a methodical approach that combined military precision with frontier justice. The bounty hunter had spent several days studying Brennan's habits, identifying the optimal position for a successful shot that would minimize risk to innocent bystanders. Target maintains consistent schedule, Morrison wrote on September 12, 1873. Morning gambling at the Long Branch Saloon, afternoon business at various establishments, evening entertainment at the Variety Theater. Photography appointment scheduled for 2 p.m. September 14th at Manning's studio. Building construction provides excellent sight lines from second floor of grain warehouse across street. Morrison's preparations had been thorough and professional. He had rented space in the warehouse under the pretext of conducting business related to cattle shipping, giving him legitimate access to the second floor without arousing suspicion. His military training had taught him the importance of escape routes, and he had carefully planned multiple options for leaving Dodge City quickly after completing his mission. The journal entry for September 14, 1873, provided a minute-by-minute account of the operation. Target arrived at photography studio precisely at scheduled time, displaying characteristic arrogance and satisfaction. Subject appeared particularly pleased with himself, likely due to recent violence. Positioned for clear shot during portrait session when target would be stationary. Morrison's description of Brennan's demeanor confirmed Dr. Rodriguez's analysis of the photograph. Target's confidence and smugness were clearly visible even from distance. His body language suggested someone celebrating recent achievements, and his hand frequently moved to touch the holster where he keeps his murder tallies. This man clearly views killing as sport. The bounty hunter's shot had been timed for maximum effect. According to Morrison's account, he had waited until Brennan was fully positioned for his commemorative portrait, ensuring that the gunfighter would be completely focused on the camera and unable to react to the threat. Single shot, clean kill, Morrison recorded. Target eliminated while posing for portrait intended to celebrate his crimes. Justice served within moments of his greatest act of arrogance. Photography session permanently interrupted. Morrison's journal also revealed his satisfaction with the symbolic nature of the execution. Appropriate that this killer's final moment was captured attempting to commemorate his evil deeds. His pride in murder became the instrument of his own destruction. The bounty hunter had escaped Dodge City within hours of the shooting, leaving behind a crime scene that local authorities were all too willing to minimize in their official reports. Dr. Rodriguez's investigation into the immediate aftermath of Brennan's killing revealed that Dodge City's authorities had quickly moved to suppress details about both the shooting and the circumstances that had led to it. The official response demonstrated a coordinated effort to minimize the incident's impact on the town's already troubled reputation. Sheriff Bat Masterson's official report, filed with territorial authorities on September 15, 1873, described the incident in deliberately vague terms. Thomas Brennan, local gambler, deceased from gunshot wounds sustained during unknown altercation. No witnesses available for testimony. Investigation ongoing. The report's brevity and lack of detail contrasted sharply with Masterson's typically thorough documentation of criminal incidents. More revealing were private letters between Dodge City officials that Dr. Rodriguez discovered in various archival collections. Mayor James Kelly had written to the territorial governor on September 16, 1873. The Brennan situation has resolved itself through means that require no official inquiry. The public safety threat has been eliminated, and we recommend no further investigation that might attract unwanted attention to our community. The mayor's letter continued with explicit instructions for managing the incident's aftermath. We have taken steps to ensure that details of recent events remain private. The photographer's records have been secured, and all parties with knowledge of the circumstances have been advised that discretion serves everyone's interests. Dr. Rodriguez found evidence that J.P. Manning's photography studio had been visited by city officials immediately after the shooting. Manning's business records showed that all materials related to Brennan's portrait session had been confiscated by local authorities, ostensibly as evidence in an ongoing investigation that was never actually conducted. However, one photograph had apparently escaped official notice. The portrait that had been captured just moments before Morrison's shot found its target. This image had somehow been overlooked during the evidence collection and had remained in Manning's personal files until the studio's closure decades later. Church records revealed that Brennan had been buried quickly and quietly, with no public funeral or official acknowledgement of his death. Reverend Mitchell's private diary noted, "We have interred the remains of a man whose violent life terrorized our community. While Christian charity requires us to pray for his soul, his death has undoubtedly saved the lives of future victims." The systematic suppression of information about Brennan's killing had been so effective that within months, most residents of Dodge City had forgotten the details of how their community's most dangerous resident had met his end. The official silence had served multiple purposes: protecting Morrison's identity, avoiding federal investigation into Dodge City's lawlessness, and preventing the incident from further damaging the town's already notorious reputation. Dr. Rodriguez's comprehensive investigation had assembled enough evidence to reconstruct the complete story behind the cowboy's smile in the 1873 photograph. The image that had seemed to depict a proud frontier worker had actually captured the final moments of one of Kansas's most notorious killers, a man who had systematically murdered at least 12 people during a summer of terror in Dodge City. The holster markings that had initially puzzled Dr. Rodriguez now told a clear and horrifying story. Each notch represented a human life that Tom Brennan had taken, and the accompanying initials were his way of memorializing his victims. The staining on the holster's interior was indeed dried blood, not from Brennan's own wounds, but from the men he had killed at close range during staged gunfights and gambling disputes. Digital enhancement of the photograph revealed additional details that confirmed the investigation's findings. Brennan's expression, while appearing confident and satisfied, showed subtle signs of the psychological effects of his violent lifestyle. His eyes displayed the hypervigilance and emotional detachment characteristic of individuals who had become addicted to violence and killing. Most significantly, advanced imaging revealed a detail that had been invisible to previous examination. A small reflection in the studio's window that showed the barrel of Morrison's rifle positioned in the warehouse across the street. The bounty hunter had been in position and ready to fire at the exact moment the photograph was taken. Dr. Rodriguez's analysis of the historical timeline confirmed that Brennan had been killed within minutes of his portrait session's completion. Morrison's shot had ended the life of a man who had terrorized Dodge City's residents and whose violence had threatened to destroy the economic development that the cattle trade represented. The photograph's discovery also provided closure for descendants of Brennan's victims. Through genealogical research, Dr. Rodriguez was able to identify several families whose ancestors had been murdered by Brennan during the summer of 1873. For these families, learning the truth about their relatives' deaths provided long overdue acknowledgement of injustices that had been buried by frontier politics and official indifference. The investigation revealed how frontier justice had operated outside official channels, with territorial authorities secretly commissioning bounty hunters to eliminate threats that local law enforcement couldn't handle. Morrison's successful elimination of Brennan had restored peace to Dodge City and saved countless lives, but the methods used had been carefully concealed to maintain the fiction of lawful society. The cowboy's smile in the photograph had preserved the final moment of a killer's career, captured just before frontier justice finally caught up with him. Dr. Rodriguez's investigation had uncovered a story that illuminated the complex realities of frontier justice in 1873 America. Tom Brennan's commemorative portrait had accidentally documented the final moments of a serial killer whose reign of terror had been ended by unofficial law enforcement operating outside normal legal channels. The photograph served as evidence of how violence had been both tolerated and eventually controlled in frontier communities where official law enforcement was inadequate to protect innocent citizens. Morrison's elimination of Brennan represented a form of justice that, while extra-legal, had effectively saved lives and restored peace to Dodge City. Dr. Rodriguez's findings were published in the Journal of Western American History, sparking renewed interest in the role of bounty hunters and unofficial law enforcement in frontier communities. His article, titled Hidden Justice: Photographic Evidence of Vigilante Law Enforcement in 1873 Kansas, provided detailed documentation of how dangerous criminals were eliminated when official channels proved inadequate. The Dodge City Historical Society established a memorial exhibit honoring the victims of Brennan's violence, finally acknowledging deaths that had been minimized or ignored in official records. For the first time in 150 years, the names of Brennan's victims were publicly recognized and their families' losses were officially acknowledged. Law enforcement historians used Dr. Rodriguez's research to examine other cases where territorial authorities had secretly commissioned bounty hunters to eliminate threats that local sheriffs couldn't handle. The practice had been more widespread than previously understood, representing a shadow system of justice that operated throughout the American frontier. Perhaps most significantly, the photograph was recognized as unique documentation of a serial killer from the 1870s. Providing insight into the psychology and methods of violent criminals from an era when such behavior was often romanticized rather than understood as evidence of serious mental pathology. Morrison's journal, made public through Dr. Rodriguez's research, revealed the bounty hunter's own moral struggle with his role as an unofficial executioner. While he had eliminated a genuine threat to public safety, Morrison had been troubled by operating outside legal channels and had eventually retired from bounty hunting due to the psychological toll of his work. The image that Tom Brennan had intended as a celebration of his criminal achievements had instead become evidence that justice, even in its unofficial forms, would eventually catch up with those who preyed upon innocent people. His confident smile had been captured at the precise moment when his violent career was about to be permanently ended by a bullet fired from across the street. In the end, the photograph served as a reminder that historical documents often contain layers of meaning that only become apparent through careful investigation. What appeared to be a simple portrait of a frontier cowboy had preserved evidence of both the darkest aspects of frontier violence and the unofficial justice system that had evolved to address threats that normal law enforcement couldn't handle.